Hello everyone, Skippy here, and welcome to One Piece episode 980, directed by Kenichi Takeshita and supervised by Masayuki Takagi and Isaku Inoue. With absurdly nice looking corrections from Takagi that play to his strengths, and an accompanying atmospheric board from Takeshita with an emphasis on the camera itself, 980 looks like it'll be pretty polished and on the same level of quality as Takeshita's surprisingly solid run on the series so far. Sure, pacing may be an issue when you take into consideration the flashbacks that have been heavily used in the past few weeks, as well as where last episode left off, but there still looks like there will be a lot to sink our teeth into, and great direction and art can help mask even the poorest of pacing, all the while there seems to be a few nice cuts of animation as well that will help keep the level of animation in this section consistent. So will episode 980 be an appropriately solid entry for this appropriately solid duo? Let's cut back to the action and find out. This episode covered the remaining 11.5 pages of chapter 976, and on top of actually showing a brief fight scene with Sanji and Kanjuro that gives Sanji some spotlight before he jobs, and showing the rest of the scabbers trying to fend off Kanjuro's attack, this episode is pretty straightforward with its adaptation, and for the most part it works pretty well for the first half, with the only things being in the way this time being the flashbacks to Momo's past instead of more of the same ship bombing, which actually does kind of work to highlight Momo's will to become the leader that everyone expects him to be, instead of just cowering in fear. But personally, I honestly wouldn't have been upset if they maybe extended the Sanji fight a little bit more or did something else to fill the gap, because the first section of the second half feels a bit drab and kinda limp in execution when it comes to the ships being sunk. It goes on for too long, the storyboard doesn't help matters all that much more with it, and despite the OST choices being strong once again, it just kinda fell a little flat for me in comparison to the rest of the episode and what immediately follows it, which feels like a competently done adaptation in comparison with good music choices and voice direction that's not spectacular, but gets the job done all the same and delivers a good offering on that front that I don't have many issues with. Quite like the adaptation here, Takeshita's storyboard isn't spectacular, nor does it go above and beyond to do some interesting things with everything, which I think could have helped some of the flashbacks have a more interesting look to them, and I would have much rather had Jinbei's introduction use some more creative angles and compositions as well, as it just kind of feels a little flat, but I won't lie and say that this board isn't good whatsoever, because it's clearly competently done despite that, and only really has the odd flat shot that don't take away from the more dynamic parts of the board with certain tracking shots that play with some low-key but still interesting all the same angles and camera shaking goodness, which helps add a layer of intensity to the scenes that needed the most. It's all in all conservative as far as Takeshita's efforts are concerned, and it might be his weakest board so far, but it didn't feel like a boring mess of one, and it just felt more like a more than passable, fairly restrained one that could have done a bit more with what it was handed. But with Takagi and Inoue picking up most of the slack of the board and offering some cool visuals themselves with their corrections, 980 is decent all in all. I was right to expect another solid effort from Takeshita once again, and while it may be among his weakest episodes just because you can tell it was a bit restrained board-wise and suffers from a strict pacing structure, it was a perfectly fine episode for what it needed to be with a few snags here and there. And it looks like it'll be a wild card as to if next week's episode 981 will fall in that same category. Yusuke Suzuki most definitely has been improving as a director as of late, and you can see some small spades of his skills in the preview, but some parts look a tad bit jank, and that's no doubt thanks to Masahiro Shimanuki's corrections that worry me a bit more than usual since he's not paired with a director like Koyama that'll make them as polished as can be. Granted though, there is a few little snippets of promising action animation from the looks of things, and the general Shimanuki-isms are corrected a bit by the two chief supervisors, so maybe we won't have to worry at all as we shove off to Onigashima. Anyways guys, that's it for now. I'm Skippy, and I love Takagi, but his Denjiro is so funny.